From the bright lights of Hollywood to the deepest shadows of personal loss, John Travolta's journey is one of resilience, redemption, and the power of love. His story isn't just about fame, it's about embracing life's toughest challenges, finding purpose beyond the applause, and discovering that the greatest legacy we leave isn't the roles we play, but the love we share. This is a tale of a man who rose, fell, and rose again, proving that no matter how much life takes from you, the heart always finds a way to shine. At 71, John Travolta's life is a story of survival, not just in Hollywood, but in every corner of his existence. He once ruled the screens, his name a symbol of fame and success. Yet, the man who danced through Saturday Night Fever and charmed hearts in Greece now walks a different path, marked not just by the lights of fame, but by the deep shadows of personal loss. Time, fame, and success have left their marks, but so have the tragedies. The bright lights of his early years have dimmed, but the scars of survival remain, more visible than ever. Travolta's journey has never been just about fame. It's been about survival, the kind of survival that goes beyond the usual pressures of celebrity. Behind every role, every public appearance, there's been a deeper struggle, a journey of losses, battles, and personal growth. Fame has given him much, but it has also taken so much from him. His life is a balance of triumphs, like his rise to stardom and iconic roles, and failures, including career struggles and heartbreaking personal tragedies. The man we think we know is not just defined by the movies he starred in, but by the pain, strength, and resilience that have shaped his true character. Through the ups and downs, Travolta has had to rebuild himself time and again. Fame couldn't protect him from loss, grief, or the deep loneliness that often comes with it. Yet, through it all, he's survived. He's endured, not because of the applause, but because of an inner strength that has carried him through the hardest parts of life. His story is not just about a man who rose to fame, but about one who faced unimaginable losses, yet found a way to keep going. But the man you think you know isn't the story he's lived. Wait until you see how this journey truly begins. John Travolta's childhood was nothing like the bright lights and fame he would one day experience. He was born into a home filled with noise, not the kind of noise you hear at a big party, but the kind that comes with a family of 8 trying to live in a small, crowded space. The Travolta household in Englewood, New Jersey, was far from glamorous. His father, Sam, worked hard as a tire salesman, and his mother, Helen, had once dreamed of a career in acting and singing, but had settled into teaching drama to kids in the neighborhood. Money was tight, and the family's home wasn't big enough to hold their dreams. In this small house, with walls that seemed to close in on him, John began to dream bigger than his circumstances. His parents did their best to provide for their 6 children, but the stress of not having enough was always there, hovering over their every meal and every conversation. Yet, it was in this struggle that John found his passion. It wasn't just about escaping the hard reality of his environment. It was about finding something that could make him stand out, something that could give him attention in a world that seemed too busy to notice him. John's childhood was a mix of joy and hardship. There were moments of laughter, but there was always the underlying tension of not having enough. Enough money, enough privacy, enough space. His bedroom was small, the ceiling stained with watermarks, and the floor creaked with the restlessness of his brothers. Still, in that chaos, he found his outlet. He began to perform. Whether it was mimicking the actors he saw on TV or putting on little skits for his family, John learned early on that performance was his way to get noticed. his way to make the world around him a little brighter, even if only for a moment. His mother, despite her own frustrations, encouraged this. She would watch him, tired from her own struggles, and for those brief moments, John could make her smile. He wasn't just performing for attention. He was performing to heal, to lift the weight off his family's shoulders, if just for a few minutes. This was the beginning of his journey, the first step in a path that would take him far from his small, crowded home. As he grew older, the world he lived in began to feel even smaller, and the tension between the life he wanted and the life his family expected grew stronger. His parents, especially his mother, had hopes for him, but they were grounded in practicality. She had hoped one of her children would follow her path into acting, but she also knew the realities of life. As John saw it, the family struggled to make ends meet, and he couldn't see himself following the same path. His dream wasn't just about success. It was about escaping the limitations of his environment, about finding something that made him feel seen, valued, and understood. At the age of 16, John made a decision that would change everything. He quit school. To many, it seemed like a reckless choice, but to John, it was a necessary one. He wasn't running away from his family or responsibilities. He was running towards something bigger. He had saved up $150 from odd jobs, and with that, he boarded a bus to New York City. He didn't have the luxury of a clear plan or a safety net, just a suitcase, a dream, and a belief that he belonged somewhere bigger than the walls of his home. It wasn't the reckless decision of a teenager. It was the decision of a young man determined to fight for his dream, no matter what the cost. New York was everything he imagined, and nothing like he imagined at the same time. The city didn't roll out the red carpet for him. In fact, it was more of a testing ground, a place where rejection was as common as the city's traffic. John faced hours of waiting for auditions that often went nowhere. He spent nights sleeping on couches, sometimes on the floor of the theaters, with the hum of the radiator his only company. He ate cheaply, and sometimes not at all. But through all the struggles, he held on to the dream, even when his body was weak and his spirit was tested. The hunger he felt wasn't just physical. It was the hunger to be seen, to matter, to be more than just another face in the crowd. In those early years, he learned that talent alone wasn't enough. The city was filled with other hopefuls, each with their own dreams, and it took more than just skill to stand out. It took persistence. It took a willingness to be told no over and over again, and still find the strength to try again. And it took the ability to turn moments of failure into lessons that pushed him forward. But little did he know, the world he was about to enter would demand more than just talent. It would demand his soul. John Travolta's big break didn't come from a polished audition or a lucky meeting with a top agent. It came from a moment of chance, a simple conversation overheard in a laundromat, and the guts to take a risk when he had nothing to lose. Before this, his life in New York was a blur of auditions and rejections. He spent his days hustling from one casting call to the next, facing the crushing reality of a city that didn't care about his dreams. In those early days, John wasn't just looking for fame, he was looking for survival. The city had chewed him up, spit him out, and left him with nothing but a suitcase full of hope. But as much as he faced rejection, he kept showing up, kept pushing forward. His spirit, though tired, was never broken. For months, he struggled to get noticed, but all he had to show for it were a few failed auditions and a growing pile of rejection letters. The nights were the hardest. He often found himself sleeping on the couches of friends or even strangers, and when there was no place to stay, he slept on the floors of empty theaters. Food wasn't always guaranteed, and he learned to survive on little more than cheap hot dogs and tap water from public fountains. He had come to understand that nothing in New York came easily, and nothing came quickly. But what he didn't know was that his perseverance was about to lead him to an opportunity he never could have planned for. One day, while sitting in a laundromat, folding clothes that weren't even his, John overheard a conversation between two young actors. They were discussing auditions for a touring production of Grease. He had never seen the show, didn't know the part, but something about the idea struck him deeply. He knew this was his chance. He walked up to the actors and, in the boldest move of his life, lied. He told them that he knew the Paredes role inside and out. With little more than the confidence that comes from desperation, John convinced them he could do the part. The actors weren't convinced, but they told him to show up for the audition anyway. That was the turning point. He knew that the audition might be his only shot at breaking free from the life he had been living. John didn't have the luxury of playing it safe. He had nothing to lose. So, when he showed up for the audition, he was ready to give everything he had. The moment he stepped onto the stage, all the pain, all the hunger, and all the sleepless nights poured into his performance. His movements weren't polished, his voice wasn't perfect, but they were raw, they were real, and, most importantly, they were alive. For the first time in his life, John didn't just perform, he bared his soul. The director, who had seen dozens of auditions, immediately saw something in John that stood out. It wasn't the skill or the perfect performance. What the director saw was a fire, a raw energy that couldn't be ignored. Despite the fact that John wasn't the obvious choice for the role, he was given a chance. He was cast in the touring production of Grease. That was the break he had been waiting for, the moment that would change everything. The tour didn't offer much in terms of comfort. John found himself on a bus, traveling from one small town to the next, performing in theaters that barely remembered him the next day. The pay wasn't great, and the living conditions were far from ideal. But for John, it was everything. He wasn't just performing for applause anymore, he was performing for survival. Every night, when he stepped on stage, he gave everything he had. And, for the first time, he felt like he was where he was supposed to be. He wasn't just an unknown actor in a big city anymore. He was part of something, part of a story that was bigger than himself. The experience of being on the road, constantly moving, performing night after night, gave him a sense of purpose. He learned to adapt, to perform despite exhaustion, to connect with audiences that often didn't even know his name. It was a humbling experience, but it was also one of the most valuable lessons he would ever learn. He was no longer just an actor hoping for a big break. He was an actor proving that he belonged. This tour, with its grueling schedule and endless travel, taught him about perseverance in a way that no classroom or casting call ever could. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. The path to success is rarely a straight line, and John's journey was no different. After the tour ended, he found himself back at square one, still struggling to find his footing in a world that had already rejected him so many times. But this time, something had changed within him. He wasn't the same person who had come to New York with nothing but a dream. He had tasted success, no matter how small, and he wasn't about to let it slip away. He was determined to keep fighting, keep working, and keep proving that he was worthy of the opportunity he had been given. But little did he know that this would not be a smooth rise. It would come with a price. When John Travolta first stepped into the spotlight, it was as though the universe itself had aligned to reward him for all the years of struggle, rejection, and sacrifice. His rise to fame was meteoric, and it came with an intensity that few could have predicted. The world knew him as the dancing king of Saturday Night Fever, and by the time Grease hit theaters, he was more than just a star. He was a cultural phenomenon. The white suit, the finger-pointing dance moves, the charisma, all became symbols of an era. He wasn't just a movie star anymore. He was the movie star. For millions, he was the epitome of cool, the embodiment of youth and rebellion. The cheers, the flashing cameras, and the fan mail came in waves. He was everywhere on magazine covers, on television, and on the lips of every teenager. But what the world didn't see was the toll fame was taking on him. As much as the public adored him, fame came with an intense pressure that began to chip away at him in ways no one could understand. The attention, the applause, the constant scrutiny. Travolta's life had become a whirlwind of noise and expectation. Yet, beneath the surface, he was struggling to reconcile the man he had become with the man he had once dreamed of being. The fame that had promised him the world only seemed to bring him further away from peace. In the midst of his rise, John faced a growing sense of loneliness. Surrounded by thousands of adoring fans and flashing cameras, he often felt more isolated than ever. The attention was overwhelming, but it wasn't the kind of connection he craved. It wasn't real. People loved the image of John Travolta, the charming, handsome, talented young man, but few people truly knew him. The friendships he had before fame felt distant, and the relationships he formed afterward were often tied to his public persona rather than who he truly was. In a world that adored him, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was losing himself. The pressure to maintain that success was crushing. His every move was watched, analyzed, and scrutinized. Directors wanted him to keep doing what made him famous, those cool, rebellious roles that had made him a household name. But inside, John was craving something more. He wanted to challenge himself, to prove that he wasn't just a one-dimensional star. But the industry didn't see it that way. They wanted the same thing again and again. The same smile, the same swagger, the same character. It was a box that he couldn't escape, and it was beginning to feel like a prison. Behind closed doors, the weight of his own success was beginning to feel like too much to bear. The loneliness was more intense than anything he had experienced in New York, even though he was now surrounded by people. The pressure to be perfect, to always be on, was wearing him down. He had achieved everything he thought he wanted, but there was a growing sense of emptiness that success could never fill. The more famous he became, the more he felt the loss of something much deeper, his sense of self. It wasn't just the public's expectations that he couldn't meet, it was his own. Travolta had always believed that fame would be the ticket to happiness, that once he made it, all the struggles of his past would fade away. But in the glare of the spotlight, the reality was different. Fame didn't bring peace. It brought anxiety, isolation, and a constant search for meaning. In the stillness of his hotel rooms after the crowds had gone home, he often found himself questioning what it was all for. The fame he had once dreamed of so fiercely didn't seem to be enough anymore. This internal conflict between the public's adoration and his own private turmoil was taking its toll. It was a struggle between the image of himself that the world loved and the man he was becoming. someone who felt disconnected from the very life he had built. The emotional weight of fame wasn't something he could escape, and as the pressure mounted, the cracks began to show. He had everything the world thought. He wanted success, recognition, admiration, but inside, he was beginning to lose his grip on the very thing that had driven him all those years, his sense of purpose. But in the midst of adoration, the cracks began to show what would happen when the world spotlight faded. The rise to fame had been swift and dazzling, but as John Travolta would soon learn, the fall was just as inevitable. With every film that skyrocketed to success, expectations grew higher. The world wanted more of his charm, more of his swagger, more of the magic that made him a star. But with those expectations came the crushing weight of failure when things didn't go as planned. The same fans who once cheered him now seemed to grow indifferent, and the bright lights of Hollywood began to feel more like a spotlight on his every misstep. In the late 1970s, John found himself in the midst of a dramatic shift in his career. He had already achieved the kind of fame most actors only dream of, but the pressure to maintain that level of success was taking its toll. His earlier roles in Saturday Night Fever and Grease had cemented him as one of Hollywood's leading men, but as the years went by, the roles seemed to dry up. The same charisma that had made him a star now felt like a trap, and no matter how hard he tried to reinvent himself, he couldn't shake the image that the public had of him. He had become synonymous with the smooth, charming, rebellious roles that had made him famous. But he was tired of playing the same character over and over again. He wanted something more, something that would prove to the world and to himself that he was more than just a pretty face with a dance move. When he took on the film Moment by Moment in 1978, his attempt to break away from his established image was met with disappointment. The film was a critical and commercial failure, and the reviews were harsh. His performance, which he had hoped would show his range, was mocked, and his reputation as a leading man began to suffer. For the first time in his career, John found himself struggling to find the roles that had once come so easily. The studios no longer came knocking, and his name wasn't being mentioned for the next big project. The phone calls stopped, the red carpets became less frequent, and the cheers that once greeted him on every corner began to fade. He had reached the top, but now it seemed as though he was sliding back down, fast. The weight of those failures was heavy. John had spent years in the spotlight, basking in the love and admiration of millions, and now he was facing the harsh reality that fame was fragile. The same people who had once adored him now seemed to forget him as quickly as they had lifted him up. The rejection, the criticism, and the loss of his identity as a star made him question everything. Who was he without the fame, the applause, the roles? Was he just a product of the Hollywood machine, a fleeting image in a world that moved on so quickly? The self-doubt crept in slowly at first. He tried to mask it with a smile or a joke, but deep down, he was terrified. What if his best days were behind him? What if the world had moved on, and there was no place for him anymore? The pressure to keep up, to remain relevant, to live up to the image that Hollywood had built for him, was suffocating. He wasn't just losing roles, he was losing himself. It felt as though he had become a version of himself that wasn't real, a character that had been crafted by the world's expectations. The man behind the smile, the dances, and the charming lines was starting to disappear. For a time, it seemed as though the public had forgotten him, and he struggled to reconcile the fame that once seemed so solid with the uncertainty he now faced. The fall from grace was swift, and it left him feeling lost. His career, once filled with promise, now felt like a series of failures that he couldn't escape. The man who had danced his way to stardom now found himself questioning whether he would ever dance again, whether he would ever truly shine. But just when he thought it was over, fate was waiting with an unexpected second chance. After the fall, John Travolta found himself at a crossroads. His career had been derailed by rejection, ridicule, and the crushing weight of fame's fleeting nature. But for all the pain and loss, something inside him refused to stay broken. When you've reached rock bottom, there's nowhere to go but up. And for Travolta, that upward climb wasn't about chasing fame again, it was about reclaiming something deeper. His sense of self, his humanity, and his purpose. Travolta's return to prominence wasn't fueled by a desire to prove the critics wrong or to chase the validation he had once known. It was about redemption, but not in the way people expected. It wasn't about headlines or awards, it was about proving to himself that he could rise again, not just as an actor, but as a man who had learned from his past mistakes. His comeback came at a time when he was willing to take risks that he had avoided before. He wasn't just looking for the next hit. He was searching for roles that challenged him, that allowed him to dig deeper into himself and explore the complexity of the human condition. His first big step toward this personal and professional rebirth came in 1994 with Quentin Tarantino's Pulp Fiction. This was not the typical role Travolta had been known for. Gone were the flashy dance moves and the charming smile of Danny Zuko. Instead, he took on the role of Vincent Vega, a hitman caught in a world of moral ambiguity. It was a role that demanded vulnerability and depth, qualities that Travolta had never been required to show in his earlier, more commercial roles. The script was unconventional, the character flawed and complicated, nothing like the smooth-talking, rebellious figures that had once defined him. For Travolta, it was a gamble. He knew that this role could either make or break him, but it wasn't just about the outcome. It was about the process, the challenge of doing something new, of proving that he could still create a meaningful performance even after his career had seemed to falter. Pulp Fiction became a game-changer. His performance was raw, unpolished, and utterly compelling. It reminded the world of his depth as an actor, and the vulnerability that lay beneath his famous swagger. The film was a success, both critically and commercially, and Travolta was nominated for an Academy Award for Best Actor. The standing ovation he received at Cannes was a moment of validation, but more importantly, it was a sign that he had found his way back, not just to Hollywood, but to his craft, to himself. Pulp Fiction wasn't just a film that resurrected his career. It was the beginning of a new chapter in his life, one that allowed him to finally embrace the lessons he had learned from the pain, rejection, and failure that had defined his earlier years. But his comeback wasn't just about the roles he played. It was also about how he had changed as a person. Travolta had been forced to confront his own insecurities, his fears, and his need for validation. He no longer relied on the adoration of fans or the approval of the industry to feel worthy. He had learned that true success wasn't about external accolades, it was about internal peace. By the time Pulp Fiction was released, he had become a different person. The fame that once defined him no longer held the same power over him. He was no longer chasing the applause or trying to maintain the image that had made him famous. Instead, he embraced the messiness of life, the mistakes, the vulnerabilities, and the lessons that came with them. With each new role, Travolta was able to rebuild his career on his own terms. He wasn't chasing the next blockbuster. He was choosing roles that allowed him to grow as an actor and as a person. Movies like Get Shorty and Face Off showed that he was capable of more than just dancing and smirking. He was capable of bringing depth and complexity to every role he took on. In doing so, he began to rebuild his self-worth, not through the validation of others, but through his own understanding of what it meant to truly live and work on his own terms. Travolta's return to the top wasn't just a professional comeback. It was a reclamation of his humanity. He wasn't trying to be the man he once was. He was becoming the man he had always wanted to be. A man who could rise above his failures, who could embrace his flaws, and who could live with a sense of peace that fame could never give him. The success that followed was secondary to the personal growth he had undergone. With every new film, he proved that the true measure of success wasn't about how high you could climb, but about how far you could fall and still get back up. But with every new victory, there was still one more battle ahead this time, not against critics, but against life itself. In life, we all face battles, but some of the hardest ones are the silent wars we fight behind closed doors. For John Travolta, the battles that truly shaped him weren't the ones fought on film sets or in the public eye. They were the personal tragedies that struck his life, often when he least expected them. While his career had its highs and lows, nothing could prepare him for the emotional toll that would come from the losses he experienced in his personal life. In 2009, John's world was turned upside down when his eldest son, Jet, tragically passed away at the age of 16. The loss came without warning. Jet, who had suffered from seizures since childhood, suddenly experienced one that would take his life. The morning had started like any other, with the family enjoying a peaceful day, but by noon, John was holding his son in his arms, desperately trying to revive him. The paramedics arrived too late. In an instant, a father lost his child. The pain was unbearable, a deep, raw sorrow that no fame, no fortune could ease. In a world that often saw John as invincible, this loss was a brutal reminder that no one is immune to the harsh realities of life. John had been a public figure for decades, his life chronicled in the tabloids and on the big screen. But nothing had prepared him for the isolation that followed Jet's death. The public watched with sympathy, but no one could truly understand the pain John felt. He withdrew from the public eye, retreating into the privacy of his home and his family. The grief was suffocating, and for a time, it seemed as though nothing could fill the hole left in his heart. The bright lights of Hollywood, the applause of fans, all felt distant in the face of such an overwhelming loss. Yet, through the storm, John found a way to survive. He leaned into his family and his wife, Kelly Preston, and their two remaining children, Ella and Benjamin, finding solace in their love. They became his anchor, the lifeline that kept him from drowning in his sorrow. But even as he found strength in his family, the question of peace remained unanswered. Could he ever truly heal from such a profound loss? In the years that followed, tragedy would strike again. In 2020, Kelly, the woman who had been his rock through the darkest days, was diagnosed with breast cancer. John had already known the weight of grief, but this was a different kind of pain. As Kelly battled her illness, John became her caretaker, trying his best to shield their children from the anguish of watching a loved one suffer. Despite his fame, despite the dividend, wealth and recognition that others envied, none of that could protect him from the heartache that came with watching his wife fight for her life. Kelly's strength through her battle was remarkable, but the toll it took on John was undeniable. The man who had once danced across the screen with youthful energy and charisma now found himself living a quieter life, consumed with the care of his family and the deep worry for Kelly's health. Her condition worsened, and in July 2020, Kelly passed away at the age of 57. It was another crushing blow, one that seemed almost too much for John to bear. The love of his life, the woman who had stood by him through it all, was gone. His heart, already heavy from the loss of his son, now had to carry the weight of losing his wife as well. The public saw the tributes, the statements, and the outpouring of sympathy. But behind closed doors, John was struggling. He was no longer just a man who had faced the challenges of Hollywood. He was a man who had faced the deepest pain any parent and partner could endure. The emotional toll of these tragedies weighed heavily on his psyche. How does a man who has known so much love and success reconcile the harsh reality of loss? How does he move forward when the very foundation of his life has been shaken to its core? Despite it all, John continued to live. He continued to raise his children, to care for his family, and to honor the memories of those he had lost. He poured himself into his work, but it was clear that fame and wealth no longer held the same meaning for him. His true legacy would be found in the love he gave and the lessons he learned through the pain. Fame couldn't protect him from heartbreak, but it had shaped him into a man who knew how to survive even the most unbearable losses. And yet, through the storm, he found a way to survive. But would he ever find the peace he so desperately sought? When the applause fades and the cameras turn off, what's left? For John Travolta, it was a quest for something deeper than accolades, a quest for meaning. After years of living under the relentless gaze of the spotlight, he began to realize that fame and success weren't enough to bring true fulfillment. What mattered more was the life he had outside the public eye, the quiet moments with his family, and the values that grounded him when everything else seemed fleeting. After the tragic losses of his son and wife, John's life began to shift in profound ways. The person he had once been, a man defined by his career, his fame, and the admiration of millions, was no longer the driving force in his life. Fame, he came to understand, wasn't the ultimate measure of success. The real purpose lay in the love he gave and the connections he fostered. He began to seek fulfillment not in the noise of Hollywood, but in the simple, quiet moments that held more meaning than any award or recognition. Family became the center of his world. His children, Ella and Benjamin, became the reason he continued to move forward, the reason he found the strength to wake up each day. As a father, he found a renewed sense of purpose in guiding them through life, teaching them the lessons he had learned, and showing them the importance of love, compassion, and resilience. John often spoke of how his children were his greatest joy, and in many ways they helped him heal. He learned to cherish the small, everyday moments with them, moments that fame had once stolen from him. Travolta's transformation wasn't just personal, it was also spiritual. He sought peace beyond the flashing cameras and red carpets, and in doing so, he began to reconnect with the things that truly mattered. He found solace in giving back to others, finding meaning in philanthropy and personal projects that allowed him to use his platform for good. He became involved in several charitable causes, particularly those related to children's health and education. His work with the Travolta Foundation, named in honor of his late son, helped fund programs for children with special needs. This work, John believed, was where his true legacy could lie, not in the roles he had played, but in the lives he had touched. But beyond charity, John's journey was also about healing. He worked on redefining what success meant to him, moving away from the external validation of Hollywood and finding peace within himself. His relationship with his family was central to this process, and through them, he began to see life through a different lens. No longer driven by the need for recognition, he focused on building a life filled with love, understanding, and emotional depth. As John embraced this new chapter of his life, he found that true peace wasn't something you could chase. It was something you cultivated through acceptance and self-reflection. It was about accepting the pain he had endured and learning to live with it, not as a burden, but as part of the story that made him who he was. The lessons of his past, both the triumphs and the tragedies, had shaped him into a man who understood that real happiness came from within, from the relationships he nurtured and the impact he had on the world around him. His career, while still important, no longer defined him. The external validation that had once been so crucial to his sense of self-worth no longer had the same power over him. Instead, he focused on the kind of legacy he wanted to leave behind, one that was not measured in fame, but in the love and impact he had on others. This transformation was a profound shift from the man who once measured his worth by box office numbers and red carpet appearances to a man who now valued the quiet moments with his children, the joy of giving back, and the peace that came with knowing he had done his best. But just as he began to embrace peace, fate had one more test in store, one that would challenge not just his career, but his soul. At 71, John Travolta stands not as a star, but as a man whose legacy has been defined not by his roles, but by the lives he's touched. His name will always be synonymous with some of Hollywood's most iconic films, Saturday Night Fever, Grease, and Pulp Fiction. But beyond the fame, beyond the awards and accolades, it's the way he's touched the lives of those around him that truly defines his impact. Through the years, John has evolved from a celebrated actor to a man deeply rooted in his family and the causes he cares about. The tragedies he's faced, losing his son Jet and his wife Kelly, have shaped him into someone who understands that fame can be fleeting, but love and connection are lasting. These experiences have given him a new perspective on life, one where success is no longer measured by the number of fans or box office hits, but by the love he shares and the lives he's impacted. John's role as a father has become one of the most important chapters in his life. The relationship he has with his children, Ella and Benjamin, is at the heart of everything he does. After the loss of Kelly, his children became his anchor, his reason to keep going, and his motivation to live a life of purpose. He has spoken about how his children have taught him the true meaning of love, and how every moment with them has become a reminder of what truly matters. The lessons he's imparted to them about love, resilience, and the importance of family are his greatest legacy. Beyond his family, John has made a lasting impact through his charitable work. The Jet Travolta Foundation, created in honor of his late son, has helped fund programs for children with special needs, allowing John to give back in a way that aligns with his personal journey. He has always believed in using his platform for good, and his involvement in philanthropy has allowed him to make a difference in the lives of others, far beyond the world of entertainment. His charity work has become a way to honor his son's memory and to leave behind a legacy that transcends fame. Throughout his career, John has always been more than just the characters he's played. He's a man who's faced life's toughest challenges, loss, grief, and failure, and yet he continues to rise. His story is one of resilience, of finding strength in the face of adversity, and of learning to live with both the joy and pain that come with being fully alive. He's learned that fame can only take you so far, and true fulfillment comes from the connections you make and the love you give. John Travolta's journey has moved from a life defined by fame to one measured by love, family, and the legacy of kindness and compassion he's left behind. He's no longer the young man who once danced his way into the hearts of millions. He is now a man who understands that the most lasting impact comes not from the roles you play on screen, but from the way you live your life off-screen. And as the sun sets on his incredible journey, one question remains. What kind of legacy do we want to leave behind? What does it mean to live a full life? For John Travolta, it means embracing every moment, every lesson, and every person with the understanding that life, with all its beauty and pain, is worth living. His journey has been one of highs and lows, of fame and loss. But through it all, he has come to realize that what truly matters isn't the applause or the red carpets, but the love we give and the relationships we build. Looking back at his story, we see a man who, despite achieving everything the world had to offer, fame, wealth, recognition, found that true fulfillment came not from the bright lights of Hollywood, but from the quiet moments spent with his family and the lessons learned from his personal struggles. Through the devastating losses he faced, John has learned that resilience is not about how much you can take, but how much you can give, how much you can love, and how much you can grow from every experience, no matter how painful. His life has been a testament to the power of love. Love for his family, for his work, and for the lessons life has taught him. John's transformation from a young man chasing fame to a man embracing peace, love, and family is a reminder that life isn't just about the successes we achieve, but the way we navigate the struggles that shape us. His story shows us that even when we face our darkest moments, there is always a way forward. It's not about avoiding the pain, but about learning to live with it and letting it become a part of who we are. In this, John has found his peace. As we reflect on his journey, we are reminded that true greatness isn't measured by the number of awards or the size of the paycheck. It's measured by the love we leave behind, the people we touch, and the way we choose to live our lives every day. John Travolta has lived a life that many could only dream of, but the real legacy he leaves isn't in the roles he's played on the screen, but in the way he has shown us that the most important thing in life is love. His legacy is one of resilience, compassion, and the courage to keep moving forward, no matter the obstacles. In the end, the greatest legacy of all isn't the fame, the wealth, or the roles, but the love we leave behind. And for him, that love lives on.